We'll go ahead and get going. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding elections risk limiting audit. It is Friday, September 23, 2022. We are noticed from 2:10 to 3:10 p.m. Documents for this work session are available online at muni.org/worksessions. We will go ahead and start with Assembly member introductions for the record.
Felix Rivera.
Daniel Boland.
Pete Peterson.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance, and I believe we have Mr. Cross on the line.
Yes, presently accounted for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. I want to note that Mr. Solt, Ms. Zalatel, Mr. Dunbar, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and Mr. Perez Verdia are excused. We are also joined by
Jamie Hines, Election Administrator.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk.
Thank you both for being here today. And I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also like to note that two of your election staff are here. Liz Edwards, Election Coordinator, and Amy Solberg, Election Assistant. And so I get the task of telling you what a post-election risk limiting audit is. And I just want to do that in the most interesting way possible before you fall asleep. And so the first thing that I will tell you is a post-election audit. It's to check to confirm that the voting equipment and procedures, which if you've been at the election center, you know there are a lot, used to count the votes work properly. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to demonstrate that everything worked right. So basically, we're checking the paper ballots against the results produced by the vote tallying equipment, and we're just letting you know that it was accurate. So the second thing I'm going to tell you about post-election or risk limiting audit is it's about a lot of math. And that's the part that might be also snoozeworthy. So risk limiting audits use statistically developed audit techniques that allows a selection of a sample of ballots to be audited to provide statistical confidence that the tabulation system performed as expected. So I already told you that that was the purpose of it. Now I'm telling you that we're using math to make sure that you can have confidence in the results. So the last thing I'm going to tell you is what we did. And then Jamie's going to actually show you what we did. So we conducted a batch level comparison audit. That's the type of risk limiting audit that we did. And you know, it makes sense when you think about it. If you came down, you saw us processing ballots in batches. And we randomly selected batches and from the entire election. And then we added up the actual votes in selected races on those ballots. And then we compared those to the tabulation system. So those three steps. And Jamie's going to talk to you more about that.
So I'm going to talk about the hand count and the machine count, and then comparing the two results. So I have here a little mock batch that would have been scanned through and we've pulled it out. We've identified it as being a batch that we're gonna audit, and so we pulled it out of the box, and we have the little green sheet on the front that tells us which batch it is and how many ballots are in the batch. What is not on my little mock is that every one of these ballots would have an imprinter number here on the side, so we know which ballot is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in this batch. So we at the election center, we have green and yellow, and red. And so it helps us to know we like the colors. So we are going to distribute out this batch. So we did this race, we did Assembly District 2. So we have Kevin Cross, Gretchen Wemhoff, and Vanessa Stevens. So Kevin Cross came in first, Gretchen Wemhoff came in second, and Vanessa Stevens came in last. So Kevin Cross is going to go in bucket number 1 over here. Gretchen Wemhoff is going to go in bucket number 2, which we're going to pretend is right here, and then other would go here. In addition to Vanessa Stevens, if we were to encounter a write-in or a blank vote or an overvote, we would put that in this other bucket.
I'll just tell you, we learned this method of hand counting from the Murkowski write-in race. And the reason that this is more accurate is that it's much more accurate to deal, like if you're playing cards, math again, than it is to tally. Because if Jamie's reading and says cross, and I mark a cross, and then she says Wemhoff, and I make another tally, it's real easy for humans to make a mistake that way. This way is more accurate. So you'll see as we proceed.
So
Chair, this is Miss Allard. I just wanted to let you know I'm on the phone. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Thank you, Ms. Allard.
Do you want to talk with
No.
as we're
Madam Chair, may I, while that's going on?
Go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
So this is a very visual presentation, which I do appreciate. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can communicate this visual or find a way to replicate this visual just so members on the phone can understand it and the members of the public can understand it.
Sure. So I had a stack of 30 ballots. They're on this stack of 30 sample ballots in this mock process. We have a certain number of votes for Mr. Cross, a certain number of votes for Gretchen Wemhoff, and a certain number of votes for Vanessa Stevens. And I'm dealing these ballots, sample ballots, into trays. So all of the Kevin Cross ballots are going to end up in one tray. All of the Gretchen Wemhoff ballots are going to end up in another tray, and all of the Vanessa Stevens ballots are going to end up in the third tray.
And I was just going to say, Madam Chair, that she used the term overvote. Overvote would be with someone who voted for more than one person in one of those races. So that way their vote wouldn't count. That's
Correct.
an overvote.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer the hand count from each of the buckets onto a tally sheet. Our tally sheet has green for candidate 1, yellow for candidate 2, and red for the other. So I'm going to count. For candidate 1 was Kevin Cross. So I'm going to count how many ballots here I have in this little example. I have 15 for candidate 1.
10.
We had 10 for candidate 2. We have 5 for candidate 3. So now I'm going to take a look again at my cover sheet, and it's going to tell me that scanner number 2, batch number 38, had 30 ballots. I had 15 for candidate 1, 10 for candidate 2, and 5 other ballots in that batch. So I have 30 ballots in that batch. Now,
So we've confirmed that with the batch count.
and we've confirmed that with the batch count. I'm going to copy that information onto this other one, another one that's going to replace it, because now our ballots are not in numerical order anymore. The red imprinter number on the upper left-hand corner of the ballot is now all out of whack. And if we ever have to come back to this batch, we're going to want to know what happened. So on the back, it says ballot in this wrap are batch 2-38. And they were included in a risk limiting audit and are no longer in numeric order. And we're just going to wrap that around that batch and put it back in to live with the rest of the ballots again. Now I'm going to go sit down again.
Step number 1. The hand count is done.
So we keep doing that with the batches that were selected until we reach the target number of ballots that we were going for. And we transfer our tally sheets onto a risk limiting audit worksheet. And I didn't bring one of those, but if you look at the front of the report for the June 21st special municipal election, the picture shows the risk limiting audit worksheet. So we, in the blue columns, we wrote the scanner and batch number, and then we wrote candidate 1 and candidate 2. Then we go to the adjudication and tabulation system, and we print out the cast vote record for the batches that we have identified. And this is where we have to make sure that we have visited Mr. Volland, because they get very small if you have multiple races. This particular batch only had 75, so it all fits on one big piece of paper. But for every candidate at the top, every candidate is at the top, and every ballot in that batch runs down the side. So every time a ballot has a vote for the candidate, it gives that candidate that vote. And then we're able to add them all up and verify that the system matches our hand count. We print out all of the reports from the system. We add up to make sure, and then we transfer that information into the gold column on our worksheet. So in this example, ICC1 batch 8 had 24 votes for candidate 1, 23 votes for candidate 2. And then the cast vote record, which is actually right here, shows 23 votes for candidate 1 and 24 votes for candidate 1 and 23 votes for candidate 2. And you do that for every batch and verify that it's accurate. If something doesn't add up, you go back to the paper ballots. We did have a couple situations. In the first one, an overvote. It was actually on a proposition. A voter had voted yes and no. And when the human was looking at it, we were in a hurry, and it got dumped into either the yes or no. And when we realized that we were off in that batch, we realized that should have been in the other bucket. So it's usually a human error, and so we can go back and correct that. So that is how we do the hand count, verify it against the machine count, and then compare the results. And then we write a big report at the end and try to explain it.
You can see in the reports that we provided, there's one report for the regular election, there's one report for the special election, and you can see that the comparisons are in section G on the regular election report, and I believe it might be not quite G in the special election report, but you can see that the result of the audit is that of the randomly selected batches of ballots, the hand count and the machine count were identical. We made the conclusion that the scanning, adjudication, and tabulation system performed as expected, and the results of the election demonstrated the will of the voters. And that is our report for you. We anticipate you may have questions.
Ms. Hines, I see you brought the dice with you.
I did bring the dice. This is what we use for the to determine the proposition. We anticipate that we would usually have more than 6 on the proposition, so we would roll the dice to determine which proposition. I rolled 3. Huh?
How many sides?
Or is it
10. This is a 10-sided. So all of the area wide would be in the first 10. We usually use a 6-sided dice when we're selecting the assembly race.
Because there are
six districts. I don't have a 6-sided dice. And then we use these again when in the number generator that gets really confusing and into the statistical business, but
Mr. Rivera?
I have a totally just off-topic nerd question, and I apologize. Are those D&D dice? Yes, awesome. Okay, thank
Go ahead, Mr. Boland.
Remind me how the batches are randomly selected again. I had the opportunity to go down to the election center in
yep, we
Ship
did.
Creek.
We
It was a
invited
while
the
ago
candidates
now,
to come
but
down
was great.
in the special election. And so the number of how we pick the number of batches. So we pick this is going to be on pages 2 and 3 of the special election packet. We identify the number of ballots that we are targeting, which is 3. For this example, it was 3% of the election. There were 4,548 total ballots cast, and we round down to get even numbers, or to get not 0.05 numbers. So we rounded down to 4,500, and then we times that by 0.03 to get 3%. For that example, we identified that we needed to look at 135 batches or 135 ballots. When you're picking the number of batches, we typically run about 100 ballots per batch. However, earlier in the election, there might be fewer than 100 in a batch because we're just running them per day. And towards the end of the election, there might just be one because it's being difficult and won't run through the scanner with its group of 100. And rather than taking the time to facsimile it, we just gingerly run it through by itself. So we knew that picking 2 batches wasn't going to get us to our number. And so we chose more. This time we chose 10, knowing you want to choose more batches so that you don't have to go back to the number generator and pick more batches. So we sort of pick a bigger number so that we don't have to go back, but yet we'll get you to your number. So that's how we pick our batches.
Thank you, Mr. Volin. Mr. Constant?
So I see in the back of the room, we have Mr. Chadwick, our internal auditor. And so I have a question for Mr. Chadwick. Mr. Chadwick, does this process generally abide by what you would call a reasonable approach to accomplishing a good audit? Maybe not good, but an effective audit.
In the brief review that I've done of the memo that I've looked at, and I walked in a little bit late on the presentation, but this looks very comprehensive. And doing random sample even is even better, because statistically a random sample, then you can extrapolate to the entire population. If it had been a judgmental sample, then you couldn't extrapolate to the whole population. So random sample in this nature would then say that the remaining ballots were counted correctly too. So if it was done correctly, so random sample is a good method of doing this if you want to know about the election overall.
So I would ask then by Tuesday, when we have this item before us, review it, think it through, and I won't ask you, but in case the opportunity arises, you'll have a couple days at least to ask yourself that question. Does this meet the standard? So it's not just off the cuff.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Chadwick. Anyone else?
I'll
Mr.
just say
Volin?
I do appreciate the opportunity that I had to go down and tour the election center down there in Ship Creek, and then also go through this process with you guys, and just appreciate how thorough it was, and yeah, gives me great confidence in our elections. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I will add, I've included this, I believe, in paragraph B on the audit for the regular election. And I appreciate that comment, Mr. Nolan, because as you can see, we started looking at risk limiting audits in 2020, and it took us until 2022 to be able to successfully do this. And one of the reasons is we needed those imprinters on so that they print the ballot batch number on the actual ballot, because otherwise you can't tell what ballot you're auditing. So that was the first thing. And Liz has been a star with that. We've struggled with that old imprinter and on and off for years, but finally they work pretty good. And as you can see at the bottom of that paragraph, when we had the recount in 2021, we had to use those imprinter numbers. So they were really helpful. And we also used them in 2022. When we did that, we did a test audit in 2021. And I can tell you, in one test, we did like 900 ballots. Well, 900 out of a total of 70,000. And by the way, we picked them individually. So we figured out this year we're doing a batch level audit. So it doesn't matter if you select the 900 ballots randomly or you select a batch randomly. Either one is random, but I can tell you that putting back 900 individual ballots in 70-some thousand was just impossible. It was so much work for us. So this system, the batch level audit, has worked much better. One of the other things that happened when the first time we tested this, we said, well, how many ballots should we audit in this contest? It said 90. So we have one that we're doing 900 and one that we're doing 90. And that just logically made no sense to us. We understand that there's a statistical method, but frankly, we couldn't explain it. So instead, what we did was the audit is the special 3%. The state of Alaska audit, well, I guess in the regular, for a district-wide race, it's 3%. For a area-wide race, it's 5%. And we did that because the state of Alaska checks 5%. Much easier to understand. So that's just another little bit of background.
Thank you, Mr. Bullen. Thank you, Ms. Jones and Ms. Hines. Would you say again the definition of a batch?
Yes. So a batch would does it start with our?
Fine sort.
Yep, there you go. Then you say it.
Okay, so a batch starts at fine sort, and so the first pass is looking at the barcode to check the voter as having voted, and then taking a image of the voter's signature. Signature verification goes through and does their thing. If there's any no-sig matches or anything like that, those are pulled off at first pass. So whatever is left as good is that batch. So we have, it used to be called the goldenrod, and I think I'm changing the name to batch manifest now because that sounds cool. And so that manifest will go live with that batch the whole way. So if there's 80 ballots in that batch, and it could be anywhere from 1 all the way to 300, but it goes with its report. It goes through envelope opening. Envelope opening will count the number of envelopes. They say, yep, we've got 80 here. They open the envelopes. They do their process. They count their envelopes. They count their ballots. Yep, we still have 80. And then it goes on to the scanning team. The scanning team in the 80 situation, would scan in the whole batch as a batch. If it was a batch of 300, it would ultimately end up being 3 scanned batches, and then it would come out with this, and then we also add this data to our batch manifest form that
So
used to be the
There are
goldenrod.
people on the phone.
I'm sorry. It's a cover sheet essentially that says which scanner, which batch number, and the count of ballots in that particular batch. So if there are 300 ballots in that batch, there would be 3 batch cover sheets to get to the fine sort batch manifest.
Madam Chair, I think your question was a perfect question. I mean, what is a batch? I mean, a batch is that stack of stuff over there that we carry down, but it's not. You can see that at the very beginning, I told you that a post-election audit is to confirm the voting equipment and our procedures work properly. So you can see that our procedure here is to start at the beginning of the election with a batch of envelopes, and that batch of envelopes is monitored, and it's monitored every step of the way through this. We document whenever any ballot is removed, so that at the end of the day, we know the envelopes that came in equal the number of ballots tabulated. So there's a double check that you just pointed out for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. And it was by implication, you just suggested you had a stack of 300 that you processed, and then you got to 3 of those forms because 100 is kind of the operating number. And so I just asked the question then, is really a batch is roughly 100 or kind of less depending on how many are in that process.
For the purposes of pulling a batch for the risk limiting audit, it's going to be one of the green sheets.
And you just suggested one of the green sheets, if there were 300 in the stack, is about 100 ballots.
Correct.
Right. So that's in a kind of a general sense, each of these batches is roughly 100 or so. There might be fewer because of process or limitation of the number of ballots that came in that flow across the machine, but ultimately it's like about 100. So that helps people to do metric math to understand how much work, how much process, how many batches to get to 90,000 or 70,000 or 5,000 or 3,900 or whatever.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Anyone else have questions or comments? I want to thank you and the team for this very comprehensive report and for all the work that went into the risk limiting audits. I appreciate the detailed discussion about the process and in back to even identifying the number of individuals required and the materials that you use to perform the risk limiting audit, and then also the section on interesting definitions. So just a final call for questions, comments. I'll just check queue for the phone. I don't see anyone else. Well, again, thank you all so very much for your work and for taking the time today to walk us through the results of the risk limiting audits. And with that, we will go ahead and adjourn to return back here for our final work session at 3:20. We are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.